Yo, what's going on everybody? Today's video is going to be on the ZDPS support Witch Doctor for patch 2.4.1. Now really not a lot's changed. One of the biggest changes to how you play the character is the nerf to health globe generation. In 2.4, one of your main jobs was to get all the health globes to fuel the arcane power for the wizard. Well, health globe generation has been nerfed to the ground, so you really don't have to worry about that anymore. So you have two main jobs as the support doc. The first one being to buff the damage of your damage dealer / reduce incoming damage for the entire group. And your second job is to scout the rift. Look for pylons, help create density, bring in more monsters so that then the monk or the barbarian or both can help really tightly group the mobs for your wizard. I'm going to show you guys some gameplay of a 107 no Rift Guardian XP run. Now keep in mind this is a petless ZDPS Witch Doctor, and the biggest reason for that is because the pets have the potential to screw up the pathing of monsters. They may body block the monsters and they won't trickle in to where the monk is grouping the enemies and things like that. So you really want to run with 0 pets if at all possible. If you're running with an Archon Wizard in lower level XP runs, it's totally fine to run pets with the SMK and Belt of Transcendence combo, just because the area of effect of the Archon Wizard is much bigger, so potentially blocking mobs with the pets isn't as big of a deal. So that'll bring us right into the abilities. First up, we have Haunt, Poisoned Spirit. Haunted enemies take 20% more damage from all sources. This is also going to be your main source of proccing Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac to reduce your cooldowns on your other abilities. You're pretty much spamming this when everything else is on cooldown. It's also poison damage, giving you damage reduction to affected enemies with the Bad Medicine passive. Big Bad Voodoo Slam Dance is probably your most important damage increase. It's going to increase the wizard's attack speed by 20% as well as their damage by 30%. And again, with a lot of CDR and the Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac, you should be able to recast this pretty much whenever you need to. Just be careful not to recast it right before you move on to another pack of mobs, because it's going to be on cooldown for a little bit until that Obsidian Ring proc kicks in. Next up, Piranha's Wave of Mutilation. Affected enemies will also take 15% increased damage. Wave of Mutilation is a knock up, so it's going to proc your strong arm bracers for more damage. It's also poison, giving you damage reduction with Bad Medicine, as well as giving you 15% increased damage when you hit enemies with the piranhas with the 2-piece Helltooth. Now, depending on the group composition and what the monk and some of the other classes in the group are running, you may be called on to run piranhas, frozen piranhas here, along with the Ice Blink legendary gem for 10% more crit for the wizard. It just kind of depends. When you get into a group, see what everybody's running. If the monk's already running it, you don't need to, but you may be called on to switch to the frozen piranhas and Ice Blink. Next up, Locust Swarm, Cloud of Insects. Enemies affected deal 25% reduced damage. You're going to be running the Wormwood in the cube, so it just passively casts this for you. You don't have to cast it yourself. In XP runs, you can even run the Vile Hive Mojo, giving you the Pestilence rune as well, which helps pull mobs from far away and kind of aggro them and get everything trickling in to where the monk is grouping the mobs for the wizard. Mass Confusion Paranoia. All enemies in the area of Mass Confusion take 30% additional damage for 12 seconds. We're going to run the Last Breath Ceremonial Knife on our character, reducing the cooldown of this even more, so you can cast this pretty often. Next up, Hex, Toad of Hugeness. So you summon a giant toad that pulls in enemies, briefly swallows them whole, then spits them back out with a layer of goo, slows them, increases their damage taken by 25%. But this is really there for the pull. You don't necessarily need this if you're running with an Archon Wizard and XPs, but for Twisters, this is absolutely mandatory and it's going to be the MVP of the build. Now, if anybody is familiar with how to stack Twisters as a wizard, you basically can do the same thing with your Toad of Hugeness as the Witch Doctor. As you can see in the gameplay, if you hold your cursor away from the mobs, you should be able to stack the toads right on top of where the wizard is stacking their energy twisters. And you don't need to look for places to stack, because the wizard's going to go find a place to stack their twisters, and as soon as they find that spot and you see where they're stacking their twisters, you can then start stacking your toads in the same spot. And with that, you're able to pull mobs right on top of the twisters to maximize damage. Now, I'd recommend that you go do some solo stuff. Just go to different areas in the game and practice stacking your toads before you go into an XP run or a pushing run with a group. That way you know what you're doing and you have some practice with it before you go into runs. Because otherwise, if you're not good at it, you're going to see the toads hopping all over the place and potentially going to areas where they're going to pull mobs away from the twisters, doing exactly the opposite of what you're trying to do with the ability. You can also block Rift Guardians in and stop them from moving with the toads. and keeping them in that twister as long as it's not a Rift Guardian that teleports around. Now in XP runs with an Archon Wizard, you're more than likely going to want to drop either Hex, Toad of Hugeness, or Locust Swarm for Spirit Walk Severance, which gives you an extra 100% movement speed while Spirit Walking, allowing you to keep up with the group. In lower level XP runs, you're going to be killing things so quickly that you're going to be moving much more than, say, you're doing 100 plus runs with an Energy Twister Wizard where you don't need the movement speed as much. Next we have the passives. Rush of Essence. Spirit spells return 100 mana over 10 seconds. This is going to be your Haunt Poison Spirit proccing this Rush of Essence, which will keep you above the threshold for the Aquila Cuirass damage mitigation. Tribal Rites. Reduce the cooldowns of the following skills by 25%. In this build it's going to be Hex, Big Bad Voodoo, and Mass Confusion. Bad Medicine, when you deal poison damage to an enemy, its damage is reduced by 25% for 5 seconds. And then Swampland Attunement. You and your pets gain 120 physical, poison, fire, and cold resistance for every enemy within 20 yards. The range of this effect is increased by your gold pickup radius. The 5th passive on your Hellfire Amulet is going to be Spirit Vessel for a second life. Next up we have the gear. As far as stat priorities go, always prioritize cooldown reduction and then defensive stats. And also keep in mind that since you're already going to have a lot of intelligence, getting dexterity or strength on some pieces of gear will actually net you more toughness, getting armor out of those. So things like the Hellfire Amulet that you can craft, you may want to craft as either strength or dexterity potentially. For most things it's not really going to matter too much, but if you're really pushing the leaderboards, you want to eke out as much toughness as you can. As for individual pieces of gear, we've got the Last Breath weapon, reduces cooldown of Mass Confusion by up to 20 seconds. And for the weapon, you don't need damage on the weapon. This is a 0 damage per second spec. So we went with Intelligence, Vitality, Life per hit, and then cooldown reduction. Illusory Boots, Int, Vit, all resist and armor on there, and you may move unhindered through enemies. This is very important so you can really get to your spots and get to where the wizard's at and move around the rift to scout and things like that. Got the Storm Shield, reduces damage from melee attacks by 30%, and you want defensive stats again on there. Ideally, you'd also have cooldown reduction. You pretty much want to roll CDR on every piece of gear that it's a possible roll on to make sure that I have Big Bad Voodoo Slam Dance up all the time. But ideally, you'd probably drop the Intelligence here for cooldown reduction. As far as the rings go, we got the Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac. This is the most important ring. Reduce the remaining cooldown of one of your skills by 1 second when you hit with a resource spending attack. So one trick to keep in mind is that if you just have one ability on cooldown, it's going to force the cooldown of that one ability. So potentially if you get into a spot where maybe you just dropped a Big Bad Voodoo and your group decides to move to another area to start DPSing, you may have Big Bad Voodoo on cooldown then. So if that's the case, you want to leave your other abilities off cooldown so you can then force the cooldown of Big Bad Voodoo more quickly. And then we've got the Oculus Ring. Chance to create an area of focused power on killing a monster. Damage is increased by up to 85% while standing in the area. This isn't mandatory, but at times it will line up to right where the wizard's standing to get this damage buff. On the rings, you really want cooldown reduction. A socket is mandatory, and then defensive stats. Got the Haunting Girdle Belt. Haunt releases 1 extra spirit, so this allows you to spread your poison spirit haunt more quickly. Again, defensive stats here. Another option for belts would be the String of Ears for more melee reduction. Got the Nemesis Bracers. Shrines and Pylons will spawn an enemy champion, so you're actually able to create more density this way, especially for XP runs, it's really good. Again, the other option would be to run Strong Arm Bracers. Enemies hit by knockback suffer 30% increased damage for 5 seconds when they land. So in this particular build, Wave of Mutilation will proc these. Also, if you run Paranado, these will be procced as well. Next, the Aquila Cuirass. While above a 94% primary resource, all damage taken is reduced by 50%. With the Rush of Essence, you should have no issue staying above this resource threshold. And again, you want defensive stats here. Got the Hellfire Amulet for that 5th passive. Defensive stats, and ideally you would also have cooldown reduction on this. But again, like I said, I'm sitting at around 54, 53% CDR, and I've had no issues thus far. But the higher the cooldown reduction, the better. Got the Grin Reaper. Chance when attacking to summon horrific mimics that cast some of your equipped skills. So in this build, the mimics will cast your Wave of Mutilation, your Mass Confusion, and your Haunt. Now, the damage amplification from these 3 abilities will actually stack with your own, increasing the damage of the group even more. Next, we're running 3 pieces of Helltooth with Ring of Royal Grandeur in the cube to get the 4 set bonus. So the 2 set, the big deal here is that it's going to increase the damage enemies take by 20%. And then the 4 set, after applying Necrosis, which you're going to be applying Necrosis mainly with your Piranhas, you take 60% reduced damage for 10 seconds to your own character. On the shoulders, you want cooldown reduction and defensive stats. On the gloves, you want cooldown reduction and defensive stats yet again. And then you want 2 sockets and then defensive stats on the pants. As far as gems, I'm running the all-res gems. If you're really low on life for some reason, you could run life gems as well, but I think the all-res gems will give you a considerable amount more toughness overall. In the helmet, we're running a CDR gem again. As far as legendary gems go, the Gem of Efficacious Toxin is even better in this patch. All enemies you poison take 10% increased damage from all sources, and they now deal 10% less damage. We got the Gogok of Swiftness. Gain swiftness with every attack, increasing your attack speed by 1% and dodge by 1% for 4 seconds now. So this now increases your dodge chance. But the big thing is the secondary. Gain 1% cooldown reduction per stack of swiftness. So extra cooldown reduction there. And then we've got the Esoteric Alteration, which just gives you a ton of non-physical damage reduction and will potentially save your life when you go below 50% life. Then we've got a life per hit gem in the weapon. Now, I've heard that there's some sort of interaction with conduit pylons and running a diamond in your weapon to increase elite damage. That may be something that you want to run as well there. Next up, we have the Kanai's Cube. For the weapon slot, the Wormwood. Locust Swarm continuously plagues enemies around you, so it's going to cast your Locust Swarm for you. I think that's the best option. Other setups, you could run Thing of the Deep for pickup radius, Ingeom for speed XP runs, and there's a few other potential options as well, but I think those are the best ones. For the armor slot, Leoric's Crown increases the effect of any gem socketed into your helm by 100%, giving you more cooldown reduction. And then the Ring of Royal Grandeur in the cube for the jewelry slot, giving you your 4-piece Helltooth. Now, if you're running with an Energy Twister Wizard, there's a good chance that the Oculus Ring pools are not going to line up with the Twister Wizard. So you could potentially drop the Oculus Ring completely and run the Ring of Royal Grandeur on your character, and then cube the Zephyrian Amulet here, which prevents lightning damage. And lightning damage is more than likely going to be your biggest problem with Electrified and things like that, but you could run any of the damage prevention amulets if you had an issue with something else like Arcane or Cold or what have you. Now, I mentioned it briefly before, but one thing you can do is drop the Storm Shield if you're not having issues staying alive, and run the Vile Hive Mojo instead in its place. It's not there for the damage at all, but just to get the Pestilence Rune on your Locust Swarm, which is going to help you with pulling mobs and getting mobs kind of trickling in from all directions to where the monk is grouping everything up. It helps with scouting and pulling from far away. For your Paragons, get as much movement speed as you need. I didn't have any on gear, so I went 25%, then maxed Vitality. Offense-wise, cooldown reduction first, then attack speed, and crit chance, crit damage really don't matter. Defense-wise, armor percentage, life percentage, all resist, life regen, and then utility, resource cost reduction, and life on hit are really the only 2 that matter. You don't want to put any points into area damage, mainly because you're not dealing any damage, so there's no point to it, and you may just add extra lag to the rifts, really being a detriment to the party. So that'll about wrap it up, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hopefully it helps some of you come Season 6. And this is really what you're probably going to be running if you want to run high-level group play in Greater Rifts. You never know. As the season progresses, there may be some other DPS builds that come along and emerge. That tends to happen from time to time, but so far it looks like this is going to be the Witch Doctor spec for grouping. So anyways, guys, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.